policy and funding, be that national, regional or local authority funding, really needs to support a really diverse range of approaches to providing good food for everyone, working with charities and social enterprises, working with small-scale producers, supporting local procurement. Yeah.
There are things we can intervene in that would make a real difference, like, trade policy and, I've been talking to retailers recently about beef procurement, and it's no surprise that the countries that they're looking to import from are those where we've got, quotas that are going to be growing over the years ahead, Australia particularly. So I think there's a challenge around those bits of policy that aren't necessarily directly food production policy, but they have an impact, again, on that confidence and that ability to produce. But you need to have a framework where the market can move towards the right decisions for businesses.
There's lots of stuff that happens in local areas, for example, where local community-based organisations really know how to work with their community, again, around like behaviour change or diet or addressing food inequality, and they're really trusted and they can work really well with their communities to bring about that change and support their community in that way. Give more funding to people like that. They can deliver it really effectively, and they're used to doing it in a really good sort of really efficiently and financially as well.
And so while I agree that a certain amount of imports and exports are good, we only grow 16% of our own fruit that we eat. And we have the capacity to do a lot more here. So I think there is a lot to be said for it. And I think that France are a great example of a public procurement system that has allowed that change and fed into the school systems, fed into the hospital systems. It feels like a rising tide to invest in that. And I'm going to tackle a bit of the other end as well in terms of regulation against this kind of concentration of power within the supply chains, where we basically have 4 companies who are controlling 40% of the market, and that all of the power is concentrated in the hands of some retailers, processors and food manufacturers. And at the other end, you have billions of consumers and tons of growers who don't seem to be able to make the changes that they would want. And that idea that this is the power dynamic that we're existing within, I do think that needs some government intervention.
But if you look at something like the cheddar market, where we import by tonnage a huge amount of sort of blocks of white cheddar, but by value we export the same amount, but we export West Country farmhouse cheddar with a picture of the farmer on it, and it goes into America or whatever. So I think sometimes we need to work out what's the thing we're trying to protect. And tariffs feel like a really clumsy way of doing it, that's a sort of headline grabber, but not the real story behind it. I think we're far better off thinking about core standards and the things that mean a lot to our consumers and and to the UK, whether that's about animal welfare or how the land is looked after, or whether you reduce the impact of Campylobacter bacteria in your poultry by washing the chicken with chlorine or by having a lower stocking density, and all those things. So I think you can get to the same outcome by focusing on core standards and protecting those, rather than necessarily thinking about a tariff.
Because if you look at sort of the food pantry stroke food bank type aspect, is large amounts of it is not the sort of fresh produce which would be nutritionally rather useful for people accessing, and a large amount of it is because it's difficult to distribute or people don't know how to cook it or whatever. But actually, looking at the waste pre-farm gate and actually using that into some of the sort of food redistribution things, could have a big impact from a health point of view.
The majority of kids are going to be overweight or obese in 9 areas in England, kind of before we know it. And I think the farmers tend to, produce healthy, whole foods. So I guess for me, I would shift again back to the idea that half of what we are all eating now is ultra-processed food. That's the general stat. The ability for the large food corporations to control that is extremely worrying. And I've seen really nice initiatives, again, kind of local, more youth-led, pushing back against the idea that like about 70% of the profits of some of these large food corporations come from selling UPFs to kids. And there has to be something done around regulating their ability to get that into the, into the reach of children, I think.
I think just building things into the curriculum that focus a bit more on valuing food and drink and where it comes from. We're trying to do a bit of that, but it's scratching the surface. But you can build it into STEM learning and things like that and really, really focus on that. So it's a long game, but I think it's a worthwhile one.
One thing, a whole school approach to food. So teaching and thinking about teaching kids about the whole food system, but also having a whole school approach to food so that good principles around good food are embedded through every touch point of food in the school, whether that's educational or what they accept.